Hey there, MJ from Pop Art Murals here with another acrylic project for my fledgling painters. I know last week's lesson was long and sort of boring, but those kind of skill building exercises really help with the fundamentals of painting. This week is going to be a lot more fun, I promise. First, we're going to start learning about creating texture with some faux finish wood. Then we'll continue working on our skills and establishing value with another black and white subject matter. To shave some time off this tutorial, I've double-timed the image transfer process and mixing of paint. The reference photo and line art are available for download at the link below. Alright, I'm giving these canvas pad sheets another go. I've got it mounted to a smooth surface with painter's tape and triple primed it with gesso, sanding between coats. We'll see if that helps. For this painting, you'll need a canvas big enough so that you can tape off a border and still have room for your subject matter. I highly recommend taping off the edges with blue or yellow painter's tape. For this piece, it will really look sharp with a crisp border. Plus, it makes painting the wood planks easier if you don't have to worry about getting it all the way to the edge. I'm using student grade paints and water for thinner. Also, we're going to be using our line drawing twice. The first time for the wood planks, and then when we're done painting those, we'll lay it back over top and do our coffee cup. Alright, as always, we're going to start with our background first. So I'm going to drop down some titanium white and some black, grab my old junky brush, and mix up a mild neutral gray. Just grab some of that black and loosely mix it into the white. It doesn't have to be thoroughly mixed. We want some variation in the color anyway. And then I've got about a 1-inch flat angled brush that I'm going to use to put that on there. And we wet that first before we pick up some paint and start getting it on the canvas. And we don't want this to be perfectly smooth, solid color because we want the background to have some character and some life too, so don't worry about getting it smooth. Variation in your colors is good. And you don't have to be super careful about hitting that line. Staying in the line would be good, like we actually know what we're doing or something. But it's not super critical to get a clean, crisp line, and you'll understand why once we start working on the wood planks. So just work that gray in until you get some decent coverage and your white specks of your canvas are not sticking out anymore. That's good enough. So now we're going to define the areas between the wood planks. That's where the lines are on our canvas now. So we're just going to add a little more black to our palette and kind of mark off those lines. Remember, we're only going to do the two that are going to be between the wood planks. We don't need to do the outside line because there won't be a deep dark shadow there. Again, not super careful, just trying to get some color on there to keep us where we need to be. Alright, now comes the fun part. We're going to learn how to faux finish some wood planks. So I've laid down some dark brown, some unbleached titanium, and some yellow. We're going to mix that up to make a base color. And I'm really not in love with that base color. I'd actually like it to be a little bit lighter, so I'm just going to throw down some more unbleached titanium and kind of mix it on the canvas as I go. And when you're painting wood, you want to go with the grain, back and forth, up and down the planks as if it were real wood. I'm using a long-handled natural bristle brush. I find that these natural bristle brushes make it easier to get the paint onto these canvas pad sheets. They're also very helpful in creating the texture of the wood. And variation in the color of our wood is good because wood is not a solid color, especially rough-hewn wood. It's got a lot of character and beat-up marks and dark and light spots. So we really want to try and emulate that if we can. And all those brush strokes are going to work to our advantage as we move along. Whoops! We don't need to be super careful, but we kind of want to stay in the lines. And I am missing all over the place today. There we go. Now that we've got the outside edge of that table done, you can see why it wasn't super important to get a clean, crisp, straight line on the background. Because it is rough-hewn wood, it doesn't need to be straight. Try not to paint completely over your black lines because we kind of need those for reference. I'm just taking my finger and trying to smooth out any of the chunky bits. We're going to let that dry for a few minutes before we move on to adding texture and character. With the paint that I had left over on my palette, I went ahead and mixed up a darker color. It's almost a black. It kind of appears red on the palette, but it's almost a black, so it had some of that brown in it. I added some black, some green, some red, and just mixed it all up, and whatever I came up with, that's good. And now to my palette, I'm going to add some unbleached titanium and some dark brown. For the texture and the character in the wood planks, we're going to use what we call chippy brushes. You've seen them in the hardware store. They're the really kind of crappy looking brushes, and you look at them and go, who in God's name would paint anything with that? Well, I would. So the very first thing we're going to do is take one of our small natural bristle chippy brushes, and we're going to put the dark shadows back between our planks. And I'm just doing it real loose. It doesn't have to be super straight or clean. We just kind of want to get those lines back in place. Now I'm adding a little bit of water to my dark brown. I didn't bother cleaning off that brush. And watch how I'm using it. I'm going in the wrong direction with the brush, right? So I'm pushing against the grain of the bristle to kind of get a scratchy sort of texture in there. And I'll add a little bit of white while it's still wet to kind of mix things up. And you want all of your planks to look a little different than the one next to it. Sort of clean up that edge a little bit. Some more of the dark brown, and I'm really loading that brush up pretty good. And you're going to go with the grain of the wood and just slide it back and forth. We don't want full coverage. We want some bare spots where the background is kind of showing through. I'm going to pick up my larger chippy brush. This one is a 1-inch. I'm just using the bristles backwards to push the paint into the canvas. And I'll just bounce between colors and mix them up as I go, mix them up on the palette, mix them up on the canvas. There's no rhyme or reason to it. Just work with it a little bit until you like what you've got. All those scratchy lines that we're leaving on our canvas helps to build depth and texture to our wood planks. Now, I'm not exactly sure what this technique is called. It's kind of like a burnish, but you're not trying to get the paint straight up on there. You're just kind of skipping along the canvas and letting it drag. And add a little bit of water, kind of spread what you've got around, take a rag, wipe it off. And you can see how it's starting to look a little bit wood grained. The most important thing to keep in mind when you're doing wood graining is always going in the right direction. The ultimate goal here is to have our table looking like rough-hewn wood or like a reclaimed wood table, and that really gives this painting some life. And when you get to that outside edge, just lay your brush down a little bit flatter and kind of slide along it. Add a little bit darker paint to it, and then take our rag and kind of blend that in with what we've already got going on. So I'm just going to keep messing with this until I get the look that I like. For my day job, I actually do a lot of faux painting, and a lot of the faux painting that I do is wood graining. So I've learned a lot of different ways to make something that doesn't look like wood look like wood. And I've painted everything from pine to mahogany to bamboo. Any kind of crazy pattern you can imagine would be in wood, you can reproduce that. I think I want to pull a little more of that blonde color out, so I'm just going to drop some yellow onto my palette and kind of mix that with what I've already got going on and blend that in with the paint that's already on the canvas. Again, I'm not doing traditional brush strokes, I'm doing like a skittering across the canvas. And then coming back with that larger chippy brush and scratching some texture into it. Super loose and funky. Now what I'm going to do next is a technique I use almost every time I do wood graining, and that is artificially adding grain to the wood. Here's the thing, you can't just paint lines onto it, you have to feather that out. So with a watered down paint you can sort of draw the lines on there, and then you immediately take the chippy brush and scratch them out. Because if you just left the lines without scratching them out, it would look totally fake. And with that technique, I'm telling you, less is more. So just do a couple and leave them alone. Alright, now, I don't really like the way my background is, like, streaky. It looks too straight, so we're going to take this opportunity to clean up the edge of our table and also swirl up some of the background color. because I really wanted something that was visually different than the planks of wood, and my background was all going the same direction. Alright, we're going to let that dry completely, and then we'll transfer our coffee cup over it. And now when you go to transfer the line art of the coffee cup, use the dark areas between the planks of wood to align the lines on our line art. There we go. Have I said line enough? I'm going to go ahead and redraw the lines of the table in just to make sure that all the messing around we did with them didn't take them too far out of whack. And this time I'm using white transfer paper because our planks of wood are so dark that the white will just make it easier to see. Now we're ready to start filling in our coffee cup. I've cleaned off my palette from all the excess wood colors, with the exception of the dark palette paint I made earlier, and I can use that to do my preliminary shadows and dark areas. I'm using my flat angled brush to reestablish the dark shadow lines between the wood. I'm also going to start establishing our drop shadow, just using that same brush. Cut in along the bottom line of the coffee cup, water down your paint a little bit, and drag it out. And the shadow will take a couple layers, so we want to go ahead and start that now. And I'm going to hit that dark line one more time before I clean off my brush. Now for our coffee cup, the first thing I want to do is establish that boundary So I'm just going to thin down some white and use a small filbert brush to go over those areas around the top. And as always, if you miss the line, just wipe it off and try again. It's going to take a couple layers of white to cover what we've done for the background, so I'm going to start putting those down now. And notice how I'm painting directionally. So this is a round object, so I'm going in a round sort of sweeping motion, and that helps to establish the shape. And as we get further into the layers and the values, you'll see how that helps. Now, without even cleaning off my brush, I'm going to go right into that dark color and we'll start mixing up our values right on the canvas. This layer of paint has two benefits, so it's covering up our background or color blocking, and we can also use it to start building the value or the lights and darks of our cup. So you get the paint down there and you start swiping in the round motion. I'm not going to clean my brush off a whole lot during this painting. If I want to get rid of the color, I'm just going to sort of wipe it off on a rag and then move on to the next one. And really work that paint into the canvas and smooth it out as best you can. In order to keep the handle sort of separated from the cup, I'm going to start painting it with a darker color. Just so you guys know, that cup on the edge of my palette is plain old water. Remember to always look at your reference photo to see the shape of things. We kind of erased the bottom of the handle when we were color blocking in the cup, so I have to look back at my reference photo and see that it dips down a little bit there. And we also want to keep a good separation between the inside of the cup and the outside of the cup, so really pay attention to your lines and try as best as you can to stay within them. We'll let that dry for a few minutes and then we'll start on our second layer. Now I've cleaned my palette off again and I've mixed up 2 different shades of gray, and then I have a black and a white. So like the first time, we'll start with that shadow on the bottom, cut that in with a little flat brush, and then blend it out. See how I just tap the color down and then pull the brush towards the shadow. That gives me a nice crisp line and also helps me to blend it out. Now I'm going to switch to another filbert brush. The shape of the filbert makes it perfect for painting this coffee cup because we can lay down a flat line, or we can come in with the tip and kind of get in those rounded corners a little bit. So I'm going to start with my very darkest gray, and we're going to work on the inside of the cup. And now it doesn't look like it's a much different color than what's already down there. The paint is going to dry darker. Alright, we're going to do some push and pull on the inside of this cup, and we want to work kind of fast so that we can wet blend right on the canvas. So wipe off the excess dark gray and pick up the light gray and start working that in. And once you get the lines cut in, then you can start blending it. Wipe off the excess and start blending. Clean off our brush, pick up the light gray again, and do the outer edge. Once you get those lines cut in, just start feathering it into the color next to it. Just using that light gray to reestablish the shape of the rim. Now I've got too much excess water on my palette, so I need to clean that off real quick. Wipe off our brush, get it a little bit damp, and feather that into the darker gray. Now we'll move on to the body of the cup. I'm going to use just a little bit of a medium gray mixing the light gray and the dark gray that I already have to cut the outside lip of this cup. Still with a sweeping motion, blending it back and forth. And acrylics do dry fast, but if you work faster than they can dry, then you can mix all your colors right on your painting. And if it's starting to feel a little bit dry or your brush is pulling a little bit, just add a little bit of water to the tip of your brush and work that in. So I use my brush to go right up against the edge of that line, and then I drag it out. If it's helpful, work in smaller sections like I'm doing. So I'll do the first little bit at the top, and then I'll sort of wet blend that line out into the darker gray. And then I'll move on to the next section. Drag that line and start pulling that paint towards the dark. So what do you think? Have we entered the hot mess phase? Yeah, I think it pretty much looks like a hot mess. It's alright though, because we're going to use our different grays to push and pull and get things smoothed out. See how I'm dragging that white into the gray that we put down first? That helps to blend and smooth everything out. And then I do the same thing with the gray right into the white. Mixing just a little bit of a darker gray to establish some of those darker values. now it's starting to look more like a contoured handle than just a backward C. The way we're working around the outside of the handle right now by adding that little bit of black where the handle meets the cup helps to establish that, yes, the handle is part of the cup, but also separate, and it gives it shape and form and makes it look three-dimensional. See how I'm building that corner on just the very upper right hand side of the cup with the tip of my brush? That's going to help to make it look even more three-dimensional when we do the inside of the cup again. We're going to let what we have down dry for a few minutes before we come back and do another layer. We're going to start again on the inside of our cup, only this time we're going to go light to dark. Again, with that filbert brush, we get that light gray laid down, and then we go pick up a little bit of the darker gray without cleaning our brush off. Scrub it in there a little bit, wipe the brush off, and then blend the two. And we'll keep working this way until we get all the way to the other edge. And just a tiny bit of black to darken that up. And we'll start pushing back the other direction. And doing it this way helps to get a smooth blend between all our different values of gray. Just the tiniest amount of water to help with the blending. And now we'll move on to do the large area of our cup again. This subject is great because it gives me a lot of opportunity to show how highlights and shadows are pushed and pulled along an object. And we're still going in that sweeping sort of round motion, blending all the areas as we go. Now this is where it can start to get a little complicated because we have a really light area blending quickly into a darker area. Don't be afraid to use your finger to get that paint really blended into the canvas. Use all the tools you have available. So now I've established my two areas, and I'm going to come back and do the best I can to blend them together. Lord, don't let me get paint on the inside of the cup, because I'm really happy with the way that looks. I'm really watering that paint down now to get that blended in, and as that paint that's watered down dries, it won't be as opaque. I'm going to use a larger flat brush and get it just a little bit wet to try and get those layers to marry. Did you see what I mean about push and pull? The dark goes all the way over into the white, and then we push the white back into the dark area, and we do that back and forth until we are happy with the way it looks. Now I picked up a little bit of the lighter gray, and I'm just trying to feather that in. And now while that dries for a few minutes, I'm going to brighten up some more of my highlights. Now we're ready to do the final pass on the body of our cup. This layer should really smooth things out and help to bring us out of that hot mess phase. because honestly, right now it looks like a hot mess. Remember to pick your junk out as soon as you see it. That way you don't have to try and fight with it after the paint's dry. So I've got little bits of paint that have dried on the palette, and my brush is picking them up and transferring them to the canvas, and we don't want that. I'm just continuing to work back and forth between the different grays and mixing them up as I go. And blending everything as quick as I can. Ugh. Oh my goodness. I seem to be having a hard time getting that line. That's better. In my opinion, the thing that really brings this coffee cup to life is the handle, because there's so much contour and shadow and highlight to it. So really take your time, look at your reference photo, and put your colors where they need to be. Try and do a good job on this part. I'm adding a little more black to my palette because we're going to dial in the shadow area, and what I've got left up there is chunky and cakey and gross. And don't just add your shadows willy-nilly. Really look at your reference photo and see where it's hitting, where it ends, where it begins, and where it feathers out. So on the very closest edge to the coffee cup is going to be the darkest, and the further out you get from there, the lighter it's going to be. Learning how to perceive and place your darkest darks and your lightest lights is one of the most relied upon skills as an artist, as a painter of things that are realistic. So if you can get a good grasp on those skills early on, you'll be well on your way to doing some great stuff. And I missed the line again, but that's alright, because it's acrylic and we can just paint right over it. Problem solved, and we'll give it another go. For these very edge highlights, I'm using a small detail brush because I want a minimal amount of white there. And going around that top right corner really makes this look three-dimensional. I'm gonna fix that overflow again real quick. I must have had too much coffee this morning. Back into that white and coming around that top right hand corner, and see where we put that dark around that corner? That really comes to life once we add the white in. And the highlights on the handle have a very definite shape. They're not just a white splotch. On the top, it looks like it's got a V cut out of it, and on the bottom, it looks like it's got a slice of gray growing right up through the center. I think it's safe to say we are out of the hot mess phase and rounding the corner to a completed painting. I'm going to hit that shadow area one more time to make it as rich as possible. As we round out this week's painting, I want to remind you about all the resources in the tutorial section at popartmurals.com, and I encourage you to share pictures of your paintings in the comment sections over there. Maybe if I get enough of them, I'll make a video and share your work. If you have any questions, please don't be afraid to ask. I'd love to help you out. If you notice, every time I do that shadow, I'm coming out a little bit further than I did with the previous layer. This helps to feather everything out. Push those shadows and highlights a little bit further back so they more closely match the shapes I see in the reference. Alright, now it's time for my favorite part of this whole project, which is pulling off the border tape. Because when you pull that border tape off, that table looks so clean and sharp and crisp, it really looks smooth. Next week we'll be painting a wine glass. For that I encourage you to add a blender brush and some acrylic medium to your arsenal. I'll link some info about them below. Until next time, go forth, make beautiful